Okay, welcome everybody to day number 2. I always think of workshops as longitudinal studies. So sometimes we have lost to follow-up. There are several people in the back who are lost to follow-up. Maybe they will come up and still be within their study visit window. Yeah, so maybe it's only a temporary loss to follow-up. But so today we have, let me just mention a little bit about yesterday and what is the plan for today. So yesterday we had the introduction to the basics in the first part of the morning of survival analysis. We talked about what is understood by the survival curve, what is understood by the hazard function, and we talked about some of the unique, what are things that make survival analysis unique, and that is the sensory aspect of the information. We then moved on to talk about what is how we go about estimating the survival function. We saw the Kaplan-Meier estimate of the survival function. And how do you compare two survival functions, either with the log rank statistic, or you do it with analytically looking at assuming that the hazard rate function is whatever it is, but it's the ratio between the two groups is the same at all time points, so we can only talk about one hazard rate ratio, then it's easy to talk about them and compare the two based on the hazard rate ratio. This is, if you look at every clinical trial or any paper that you see survival analysis, this is what you will see. So, one of the things that many of you mentioned at the beginning of yesterday was that you were looking forward to understanding when you read papers what they're doing in survival analysis. So we hope that you now are able to have a good understanding of the basic things in survival analysis. But people go beyond just comparing the survival distributions. They want to see what is the effect of covariates, other explanatory factors on their survival functions. And so the way we introduced this was you can do it different ways, but the most common way is to model the hazard as opposed to model the survival function. When you model the hazard, we have proportional hazards models, and the most famous one is the one that Sir David Cox proposed. So we talked about the Cox proportional hazards model. Again, when you read the literature, you will see that most people also do adjustments to the comparison of the two curves by doing Cox proportional hazards models. And so the standard, you would say, almost template for reporting survival analysis in clinical trials is what is typically done, is to look at the Kaplan-Meier curves, do the log-rank statistic, calculate the hazard rate ratio, and then do a Cox model. Okay? And that's what we're going to do as an exercise today. So the first, you will be doing that, working on that exercise this afternoon. I'm just going to introduce the exercise now. The lectures today are going to be going further. Well, at the end of yesterday, we complicated things by looking at competing risks. And today we're going to complicate things more by having frailty models and having joint models. So these are more complex types of analyses that are being done. Not everybody does it. Not everybody presents it. Some of it is also relatively new methodologically. So just like yesterday, we talked about some people want to look at more than one outcome, and they have recurrent outcomes. The methodology for studying recurrent outcomes is not ready for prime time. People do it but it's not very well understood. The methodology for joint models, which we'll be talking about this afternoon or later this morning, is also relatively new. So you're sort of getting the latest things that are happening in survival analysis. Having said that, that means that you won't see that much in the papers. When you read papers, people don't do it. People are starting to incorporate it. Remember yesterday I mentioned that when things come out in statistics, like the Cox model came out in 1972, people didn't start using it until early 1980s, actually. Part of it was due to software, but part of it was that people needed to understand what the methodology is doing and to understand and interpret the results. Okay? So that's what's going to happen with the lectures, but you will have time to work on an exercise that we're assigning to you. Now, the way we're going to do it is we will break you up in groups, and the groups will be done systematically, not randomly. It will be done systematically. We'll be making 8 groups because we're going to have 8 questions in this exercise. And then tomorrow, you'll work on this exercise in this afternoon, and maybe if you need to in the evening. And tomorrow you will be presenting, every group will work on all 8 questions. But then tomorrow we will randomly assign group 1 to present a question, group 2 to present another question. So everybody will be presenting with questions. And when you're not presenting, you are now reviewing the presentation that's done by others. Okay? So that you'll be participating in that way tomorrow. So the exercise consists on the simple things. It's not doing the complex things of today, but it's doing the things that we talked about yesterday. So it consists of analyzing a particular randomized controlled trial. So it's a longitudinal study. The outcomes are going to be time to event. So survival analysis is the methodology that you will be using. Okay? So everything that we covered yesterday will be included in this exercise, all the way up to competing risks. You have the RStudio Shiny apps to run things, but this is a new data set. Okay? So it's a different data set than one you have. And I wanted to make not a correction, but a clarification of what I said yesterday when I said, oh, running these things are very easy. Yes, running things is easy. The hard part is getting that data set prepared. And most of the time spent in doing survival analysis is having the data cleaned, validated, and ensured that it is in the right format for whatever software you're using. This takes time and effort. I would say probably 95, 96% of the effort is there. As I said, most of the analysis is pretty much template oriented for randomized controlled trials. But you still have to say what you're going to include, et cetera. That may be 3 to 4%. And 0.5% is pressing this button in the computer, because now the computers do it. Back in the old days, we were not even able to do this because we could not do this by hand. Some of these techniques were not possible to be done by hand. So that was a correction. That it's not easy. It is easy once somebody gives you a nice, very clean data set. And you're getting a very nice, clean data set. I actually asked Mark if he had tampered with the data, but he's too nice. He didn't tamper with the data. I said, next time we will put some bad data there, but to make sure that you clean the data first. But you don't have the tools to clean the data. We don't have the time here for having you clean the data. So you're getting a nice, clean data set this time. In real life, nobody gets a nice, clean data set. If you're working with a statistician, that statistician is now spending hours and weeks to get that data in shape for you to then be able to analyze it. All right, so what is the exercise? Here's this 2-arm parallel design randomized controlled trial. We describe it by the PICO, PICO is the population. And this is patients in end-stage renal disease being treated with chronic dialysis. So they're already on dialysis. Okay? There's over 2,000 people here. It's a large data set. They're being randomized to an active intervention versus placebo. The active intervention is to get spironolactone so that there's not spree, there's an extra R there in my typing. And the O is the outcome. And here it is a time to the first occurrence of the composite outcome of cardiovascular mortality and hospitalization. So two things are put together. Hospitalization due to heart failure and cardiovascular mortality are married together into one single composite. And it is, the endpoint is a composite combination, but the outcome is the time to the first occurrence of that composite outcome. So either one of those things happens, the outcome has occurred. We call it an event-driven trial, and we power it to have so many events to be able to answer the research question. So the timing is not necessarily that important. It is when you reach so many events, and it's based, the design is based on the number of events that you are accruing by a given time point. So as always, any statistical analysis starts with a research question, and any statistical test of a hypothesis, any statistical test has a hypothesis. So our research question could be, or is, what is the effect of the intervention, spironolactone, on the composite endpoint of CVD death or heart failure hospitalization? What is the hypothesis that we're testing? We would assume that spironolactone will reduce the occurrence of cardiovascular mortality and hospitalization, or it will delay it, reduce it occurring, or delay it and have it come later. So what would you expect if the intervention is true? What is the hazard ratio that you should get of this? Is it going to be greater than 1, or is it going to be less than 1? It's going to be less than 1, right? So these are the things that before you even look at the data, you need to understand what is your question and what do you expect will be the result. If you don't find the result meets your expectations, then either you're thinking your expectation is wrong or the data are wrong. So you need to make sure that you understand the question first. So it's not just an act of wildly going around and computing. You have to understand what is happening here. Now, I'm going to give you some other data sets, the names of the variables that we have. So treatment in the data set is the variable ALS. And it's 1 for spironolactone, 2 for placebo. The baseline variables, which can be used to define subgroups of interest, for example, would be whether you have a history of prior heart failure or not. That's a binary variable. Then your sex, male or female, and whether you have a history of coronary artery disease, CAD, or no history. So you may say, oh, maybe the effectiveness of the intervention is different in people that have had prior history or not, or different in males or females, etc. There is another variable that's called SERV, that is the total follow-up time in days as well. And there's a bunch of outcomes. Why are there a bunch of outcomes? Because every investigator is interested in bunches of outcomes. They're not interested in only one outcome. And while they're studying, some people, they design their study for one primary outcome. They power the study. They do the sample size calculations for that one primary one, but they're still interested in others, right? Their primary one here is this one, EVCOM, which is the composite outcome of CV death or heart failure hospitalization, whether it occurs or not occur, and the time to it occur. So you see that these are same color, these are same color, the ones that are same color go together. One is the occurrence or not, and the time to the occurrence, okay, or not occur. So they always go together in survival analysis. Why are we giving you all of these? Because yes, this was actually a real study. We changed the dummy allocation. So you're not getting the real study allocation because we don't want to give that to you. The principal investigator would be upset if we gave you the real data. And then you started doing all sorts of analysis and publications on this and whatever. I'm not going to mention the study name, so you don't go Googling it or whatever. But the numbers in the variables are real numbers, but the allocation is fake. It's also not the full sample size. We sort of dropped a bunch of people artificially so that you don't get the actual numbers or even can guess what the study is by the actual sample size, for example. But we didn't want to generate and simulate data. These are actually real data. So we have multiple outcomes. One is death by any cause. One is heart failure hospitalization. The other one is cardiovascular death. The other one is non-cardiovascular death. And then you have stroke, yes or no, in addition to the composite outcome. The reason you have all of these is that we're going to have in the exercise, have you do some things that are not necessarily what that study was interested in. Okay. We also have in the original data set, the original analysis, you can ignore competing risks. So in the original one, sorry, go back. Oops. In the original composite, it's CV death or heart failure hospitalization. So if you die of cancer or you die of a non-CV death, then a non-CV death becomes what? A competing risk for this. Because if you die of this, you can't die here, or this that cannot occur. So that's a competing risk. So the original analysis was with competing risks. And so here we had the status variable is coded in a way that it's 0 for no event, 1 for the event of interest, which is a composite. And then number 2 is the competing outcome. And the competing outcome for heart failure hospitalization or CV death is non-CV death, dying of another cause. Okay? Why isn't stroke a competing risk for that? Because if you get a stroke, you're still at risk for getting heart failure hospitalization or CV death. Remember that a competing risk is something that precludes you from being at risk. Yes, technically you could say, well, it changes your risk, but we're not going to worry so much about that part. So we usually, we should worry, but we typically don't worry about things that only slightly maybe change your risk. Assume that it doesn't really change your risk much for the event of interest. But if it precludes you from getting it, then we worry about it. So for the original outcome of the trial, the competing outcome was non-CV death. Okay? And survival time, it's time to the composite event or no event or competing event. So when you're doing competing ones, you have the survival time. Now, that's what's in the data set.